Some people think that the truth is just a matter of opinion. But when the truth gets hidden in lies and confusion, we end up with chaos. Discerning fact from fiction has never been harder. I'm not interested in popular opinion. It's about evidence. Cutting through the noise. Looking at it from every angle. To find the one thing that matters. The truth.
A Malaysia Airlines passenger jet has crashed in Ukraine.
298 people killed in an instant.
This was a global tragedy, an outrage of unspeakable proportions.
What happened? That's the big question.
There were so many theories.
We were obsessed with trying to find the answers.
We knew Bellingcat were doing things that no one else were doing.
I can no longer live the life of a regular person. They're trying to kill me.
Know where to look, you can find anything. Planes don't just fall from the sky for no reason.
Richard, yeah, how's it going? Yeah, pretty nervous, pretty nervous. I just like to say thank you to all those people who helped support me. I'm going to finish off. Close jump now. Go out the band. Cheers, guys.
He was an extrovert. He had quite a natural charm about him. That sort of cheeky, chappy. I mean, don't get me wrong, he could be like an absolute, you know. We used to play rugby sometimes just on the local park. He'd always want to practice his sort of contact skills on me. I used to dread that. It was still just spending time with your brother, isn't it, really? I remember going with him on the open days at Leeds University, and one of the main aspects of the course is to go abroad to University of Western Australia, and that's what he wanted to do. Richard was getting ready for this trip. He was going away for a year, and there was just like a bit of a mayhem going on because he just wasn't really organised.
He was always lastminute.com, Richard. And, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning, Richard is still packing.
There was a bit of friction because Richard and his mum are going through this suitcase and were saying, you know, do you really need this tuxedo? Do you need these polished brown shoes? They were having to make these decisions about what he could take. He was catching a connecting flight from Birmingham over to Amsterdam and then picking up Malaysian Airlines Mh17. We were pretty tired, a little bit jaded. By this time, Richard wasn't talking to his mother. And he goes to the gates, the passport gates, and his mum is stood there looking at him. She thought he just wasn't going to say goodbye. He got through the gate. Yeah, he got through the gate and sort of turned around and just gave his mother this, wonderful big smile. Saying really, shut up, Mum, but I love you.
In 2014, I was struggling to make ends meet. I was trying to earn money as an investigative blogger, and my wife was pregnant with our second child. I was just browsing through Twitter, seeing what was happening, and then there were just more and more reports of a plane that had crashed in eastern Ukraine. At first, there was a bit of confusion about why it crashed. Some people were saying it was a military aircraft, but very soon it became apparent that it was a commercial airliner.
Those reports that a Malaysian Airlines plane has crashed in Ukraine close to the Russian border.
I'm a bit of a news junkie, so this immediately caught my attention.
Now, what exactly has happened is still unclear.
But very quickly, these videos started emerging that people had found online.
Это что такое вообще? Я не понимаю. Автобус? Нет. Самолет, вертолет. Люди. Давай, Света, ты видела?
Женская. Так что ж это?
Телефон нужен. Не тут людей. Мамочки, там еще люди.
The Boeing 777 was flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur.
196 Dutch nationals, 43 from Malaysia, 27 from Australia, 12 from Indonesia, 10 from the United Kingdom.
I was on holiday, so with a couple of friends I was traveling to the south of Germany. I got a phone call from the office that something terrible had happened and that a plane had crashed. The information was taken off from Schiphol Airport, so there was already absolute clarity that there would be many Dutch people involved. It started to dawn on me that this was big. It was really big, also because of the geopolitical implications. The whole world was basically reporting on this.
The flight path took it over Donetsk in the troubled region of eastern Ukraine.
Taking place in an area with ongoing conflict and amidst rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine.
Ukraine was a country I'd reported on a lot. I called my bureau chief and said I'm available. A couple of hours later, I was in a taxi to the airport. I was on the phone with local journalists in Donetsk trying to just get a picture of what was happening. I needed to get to the crash site. We didn't know exactly where the plane had crashed. It was somewhere near the Russian border. That part of Ukraine had seen a huge escalation of violence in the previous 3 months from pro-Russian separatists.
The separatists here call it the Donetsk People's Republic, a self-proclaimed state that wants independence from Ukraine and a new future in an expanded Russian motherland.
Ukraine had been resisting for months in an attempt to prevent the whole area being occupied by Russia. It was an active war zone.
At that time, I was working for the Daily Telegraph, and I'd been sent to try and find the crash site and cover the story. There was very little information at that stage. You start getting into the war zone. You're going through all these checkpoints, manned by guys in camouflage and flip-flops. There was one guy who took our passports. He's got a grenade, and his ring finger is through the pin of the grenade. And he's just like, he's doing that with it. There was a lot of standing around at the checkpoint smoking, wondering if they were going to give our passports back, wondering if we were going to be arrested. They let us go on. So we're thinking, where do we go? Where do we go? Okay. By this time, we're beginning to learn vaguely where the crash site is. We're getting tips. And it had been posted on social media. We made the mistake of following a road that the taxi basically almost was destroyed. It was just potholes. Had to travel at about 5 miles an hour. And it's quite kind of overcast at this point, late afternoon light. And you're thinking, we're going to struggle to find the crash site in daylight.
With very few details available, people are trying to work out what exactly is going on.
There seems to be very little new information coming in from the news. But online it was buzzing, especially on Twitter.
It was a constant flow of information. You had people showing videos, photographs, links, ideas and queries.
The scale of death was something that was quite significant, and that was quite shocking to hear. There was so much confusion about the circumstances. But what was the truth? What had happened to Mh17?
It was a really hot day. Richard's gone. It was my 19th birthday as well. I was just quite happy, just relaxing, to be honest. I was just scrolling on Twitter, and there was a big news, obviously, this big plane crash in eastern Ukraine. Then there was a bit more information about the origins of the flight, etc. And then I start to panic a little bit.
William just comes charging down the stairs and says, Dad, look at this, look at this.
I was shaking. My parents were like, what's going on, what's going on? And I finally get the news on.
A Malaysian Airlines plane has crashed in Ukraine. Reports have confirmed it was close to the Russian border.
You've got these pictures of wreckage, burning, like something out of Dante's Inferno.
William said, what flight was Richard on? Was it the flight to Brussels or Amsterdam? Please tell me it was the flight to Brussels.
William says, is that his flight number? I had booked the ticket, so I knew what his flight number was. Mh17. You know, that is his flight number, and that is his flight. That is his plane.
Now what?
You couldn't make sense of that those pictures had anything to do with your son. And then a veil just sort of fell upon the whole family.
It was a beautiful summer's morning. You're in the middle of the countryside. There's a wheat field, sunflowers, the birds are singing. And we went up onto the road. And straight away, you started seeing bits of flesh. You had people still strapped into their seats and people in bits, scattered over a vast, vast area. There were these sticks sticking up with a little white ribbon on. Those were the markers for dead bodies. They were just dotted over this field. In the corner, just past the charred bit, there was a little girl. And, like, she sticks in my mind. You had everything that goes into a cabin. Lots of wheelie suitcases, Lonely Planets. It's just so intimate. Your life, basically, just sprayed everywhere across the landscape of Donbass. No one had really kind of secured the site, cordoned it off, which is pretty strange. And then later on, all the other journalists had arrived and some gunmen had arrived, and it all got a lot less easier to work.
We got to the site, and there was a very obvious sense of confusion.
We have been trying to figure out who these militiamen are, whether they are under Kiev's orders or those of the rebels, and now I've got the answer. This ribbon that this man has, that ribbon is the sign that they answer to Donetsk People's Republic. That's the rebels.
The rebels who were in charge of the whole thing didn't know what to do. Most of them were thugs. You can't come here, you can't come there. They're trying to limit access. Because of that, there was a lot of tension in the air.
You know, there was no command and control. Stuff had been moved, stuff had been removed. Like, forensically, it was disaster. Standing there, looking at that complete mess, there was no way of knowing what had happened. It was complete chaos.
And the big worry was, with no crash investigators still able to get here, how would any official investigation ever be able to find out what happened?
When I'm confronted with a problem, I have to do something about it. There must be a way to make sense of the chaos. I'm looking for patterns, gathering data, comparing it, analysing it.
I will happily spend hours on the internet digging through hundreds and hundreds of links trying to find the one video or photograph that helps me reach my conclusion. It just becomes this complete obsession. You know those glass globes with the electric scattering around? You put your finger on one point. Everything is drawn into that one area of focus. It's like that in my mind. You cannot think about anything else. Until you've kind of scratched that itch, you just can't move on. You have to do something about it.
And suddenly it all comes together. Before Mh17, I was at a crossroads in my life. I had spent the last 2 years writing a blog investigating what was happening in Syria, trying to debunk some of the disinformation on chemical weapons that was sprouting up across the internet.
When I started doing this, there was a very small group of us who were looking at this stuff. We would take publicly available information, particularly on the internet, such as social media posts, satellite imagery, and it's bringing that all together, analysing it, verifying it, and then drawing conclusions based on it.
This kind of work is known as open source investigation.
Some of my work was picked up by the mainstream media, and I thought, how do I actually turn this into a job? Because it's what I wanted to do with my life. It was the one thing that I thought was really valuable. I decided to take the plunge and go full-time. I set up Bellingcat, a website dedicated to open source investigation. I had no savings, and I didn't have any safety net. And looking back on it, I was completely mad to do it. Then a few days later, Mh17 happened. And I realized that I could use the skills I'd learned investigating stuff in Syria to examine this. It was such a horrific incident. Maybe I could help uncover the truth.
There are still no answers this morning as to why Malaysia Airlines flight Mh17 came down over Ukraine yesterday afternoon, killing everyone on board.
The United States will offer any assistance we can to help determine what happened and why.
But it's going to be a huge challenge for international investigators to get here and operate here safely. This is the middle of a war zone.
As the official investigators couldn't get to the site, I suppose we journalists were trying to shed some kind of light. That's your job. That's why you're there. But when you're in amongst it and you're right up close, your field of vision is really limited. I didn't know, how does a plane that has suffered a mechanical failure or something gonna look different to a plane that has been struck by some kind of weapon? Or how that would look different from an airliner that had been, I don't know, blown up by a terrorist bomb like at Lockerbie. It was just a surreal mystery.
While the people whose job it was to get to the truth were being blocked at every turn, examining this digital evidence became even more important. It was all I had to go on, and I was sure it held the secret to what happened. By that point, you do have more journalists on the ground. You're getting all their reporting alongside all this raw information being shared from people at the crash site. I was poring over every bolt and scrap and hole. This piece of the aircraft was bent backwards. It had a number written on it. What did that number mean? Like, I knew nothing about aircraft in that way. And the wreckage was really hard to figure out what it was because it was torn to pieces. It just didn't make sense as a space to me. I had about 30 just random pictures of the same bit of wreckage from different directions. So I started by finding matching elements in the images, finding parts that looked the same. Then I numbered the image files in order from left to right. So you have a kind of 360-degree view of the wreckage. I was able to get a perspective that no one on the ground had. I knew these images held vital clues about what happened to Mh17. But what was it telling me? I didn't know where to go next. I was stuck.
There's little dignity for the victims of Malaysia Airlines flight Mh17.
It is very hot, and sadly the majority of the victims that have been located are still lying in these paddocks.
Armed rebels are trampling the site.
We saw the images of the bodies in the fields, between the sunflowers and all the grass. How they were moving the bodies made me sick. My son, Bryce, was 23 and Daisy was 20. He really fell in love. She had a very good influence on Bryce. Not that he was bad, but he was fooling around and doing whatever he liked. We really saw him turning from a young boy into a caring young man. Yeah. That was lovely to see. They were very serious together. They were thinking about having a family at a young age and wanted to live together. And they were really looking forward for the future. The first time we went to Indonesia as a family, that was when Bryce was 10 years old. His father was Indonesian, so he felt Indonesian. He loved everything about it. That's why they went to Bali. He wanted to show Daisy the land he loved. The minute I heard the plane had crashed, I knew it. No hope. No hope at all. It was chaos in the house. Madness, yeah. After that, we were just waiting. There were two things: the children, the grief, the body parts. And the other one was finding out the truth. How can you do a proper investigation if you don't have access to the crash site? And that worried us a lot. We're afraid that the truth might never come out.
It was a difficult time because the official investigation had ground to a halt and mine was at a standstill. I hadn't made any headway analysing the wreckage, so I started looking online for help.
Lots of online discussion about it, questions about what had happened. Twitter was a really big part of that. A lot of it was just conspiracy theories or just speculation, stuff that wasn't really valuable. But right away I could see there were people who were taking this seriously and were trying to dig into the details of it.
They all had different areas of expertise. I started following them. But at that point, there was one that really stood out. Bellingcat.
He was really focusing on the wreckage of the aircraft. He was not someone who kind of made big claims or exaggerated things. He's just piecing stuff together in a very strategic fashion.
I thought this is someone who can help us understand what the wreckage is telling us.
The breakup of an aircraft is a very violent event. There's much different kinds of damage on the wreck anyway. So the challenge is finding the relevant pieces of information that actually tell you what may have happened. I was to do my military service in Finland and learned about different types of aircraft, how they fly, altitudes, speeds, etc. I could relate that previous experience into the discussion about Mh17. I looked through hundreds and hundreds of images, technical documentation that was available online about this Boeing aircraft. And then it became clear that some of the parts had markings that we could use to actually see which part of the aircraft it was. I was collecting those images and I started this online gallery where I was posting the identified parts of the aircraft and which part they were, so that we could see that if there is damage on the aircraft, that how is it localized.
These early conversations were just replying to a tweet here or there.
But it was a really productive exchange of ideas.
And the fact he was pulling out this stuff about the structure of the aircraft was really useful.
It felt like his work was moving things forwards.
What we saw then was especially this one part of the cockpit that showed significant damage. Little holes in the cockpit, but also the tighter patterns of damage as well. That looked like it could not have been just from the crash itself, but it was something external. The evidence started pointing very strongly towards the hypotheses. Mh17 was shut down.
news, U.S. intelligence sources have indicated that Flight Mh17 was shot down.
We insist that the perpetrators must swiftly be brought to justice.
There has to be a credible international investigation into what happened. Investigators need to access the crash site, and the solemn task of returning those who were lost on board the plane to their loved ones needs to go forward immediately.
Having confirmation of VP's theory that the plane was shot down really spurred us on. It meant that he was on the right track. But in the media, the blame game had begun.
Ukraine has accused pro-Russian separatists of shooting down Mh17.
There were so many theories.
Ukrainian officials are not just blaming pro-Russian separatists, but are blaming Russia.
One side says this, and the other side says that.
In Moscow, President Putin denied any Russian involvement and laid the blame for the crash squarely at Kiev's door.
The Sun's front page was Putin's missile. I remember seeing that and going, sure? Do we know? Like, how do we know? At the time, that was a big accusation to make because Putin had a working relationship with a lot of Western leaders. Things were starting to get strained with his invasion of Crimea, but there was still an open dialogue.
The rebels who now hold this, one of 2 flight data recorders recovered 2 days ago. They've promised international investigators will have access whenever they arrive.
The pressure was on Russia to use their influence on the separatists to help get the investigators to the crash site.
I had worked with Vladimir Putin since 2011. We had regular meetings. We knew each other very well. We had very long conversations. So there was this bond. And I felt I had to use to the max that relationship to get this going, to investigate what had happened. I knew that Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, did not have any influence in those parts of his country. So I needed Putin. I think for me as a politician, this was potentially the biggest thing which happened in this role. Much more was at stake here. I was on the phone every day with him. I tried to keep it as neutral as possible. And please, could he help? And he making clear to me, yes, but Mark, it's not Russia involved in Donbass and Luhansk in the eastern part of Ukraine. And yes, I know, I understand that, I accept that for this moment, but Vladimir, you have more influence on the people there than I have. For that moment, the first priority was get our people back. And of course, also establishing the cause of the crash. And you realize that will be very difficult.
Inside these refrigerated boxcars lie the remains of the dead of Flight 17. Their ultimate destination remains unknown and in dispute. They're in limbo.
You can see armed rebels are very much in control of that train, and it is they who are preventing its departure.
People who lost family members and loved ones and friends were all crying out to us, get their remains back. We want them home. The main reason to be in a hurry was because we wanted to do what the loved ones of the victims wanted us to do. And the second reason I had was to prevent the site being manipulated in a way that would then make it later more difficult to find who's culpable.
Frans Timmermans is one of our best diplomats. So what we early established that I would more or less run the home front and be on the phone with the leaders, and he would travel the world.
I thought I need to go to New York and speak to the United Nations Security Council. The ambassadors are really powerful people. And if I could convince the Russian ambassador, I think he would say to Moscow, listen, we need to give these guys what they're asking for because the pressure is too great. I thought, yes, I could use legal arguments, but I was not sure those would be convincing. I need to talk to him as husbands and fathers and sons and brothers and sisters. I have to make this personal. We're here to discuss a tragedy. Men, women, and a staggering number of children lost their lives on their way to their holiday destinations, their homes, loved ones, or international obligations. How horrible must have been the final moments of their lives. Did they lock hands with their loved ones? Did they hold their children close to their hearts? Did they look each other in the eyes one final time in a wordless goodbye? We will never know. If somebody here around the table talks about a political game, this is the political game that has been played with human remains, and it is despicable. Once the investigation ascertains who was responsible for the downing of the flight Mh17, accountability and justice must be pursued and delivered. We owe it to the victims. We owe it to justice. We owe it to humanity.
That was crucial. I saw it on television, I had tears in my eyes. This was exactly what we needed to put pressure on Russia.
Accountability and justice must be pursued and delivered. We owe it to the victims.
It was a huge tragedy. You know, nearly 300 people had lost their lives. The human cost made finding the truth all the more important. I approached this from the perspective that it could have been Russia who shot it down, it could have been Ukraine. I thought, well, what does the actual evidence show us? I was looking for indisputable facts. The next logical step would be considering what kind of weapon could have done this. Again, VP's knowledge of weapons systems were proving essential. He kept going back to analyze the damage on the wreckage, and each time he discovered more clues. It felt like he was getting close to figuring out what kind of weapon could have brought down Mh17.
A train carrying the victims' bodies begins its slow journey to the town of Kharkiv.
Inside the cars, 280 individuals. They will travel into the night, and sometime in the next few days be flown home to their countries.
That was the first time things were moving. Something was happening. I felt relieved. I just wanted the children back home. This was the start of our justice. To know the truth.
Truth. That's what Richard and so many others deserve. Just get these international investigators in there just to do their job effectively. Make sure whoever's done this be held accountable.
This is a global tragedy with dead passengers from over a dozen countries. Where are all the people that you'd expect to find around a crash site and a tragedy like this 4 days after the event?
It did feel like we were just players in a wider game, really, of geopolitics.
4 days after the crash, completely out of the blue, there was a press conference by the Russian Ministry of Defense. It was a really big event because this was the first time there was an official response from Russia about what happened to Mh17.
Прямо сейчас начинается специальный брифинг Минобороны, на котором будут рассмотрены обстоятельства катастрофы малазийского лайнера на Украине.
Distinguished media representatives, ladies and gentlemen.
It was streamed on various channels. You know, Russia Today streamed it. They had some video footage, they had radar imagery, they had satellite imagery. So Russia presented a few different theories. The satellite imagery showed Ukrainian missile launchers on the move and ready to fire. Radar data showed that a Ukrainian military jet was close to Mh17 when it was shot down, and the Mh17 was redirected from its flight path into a zone of danger. So all this was really about blaming Ukraine.
To conclude, I'd like to mention that all the briefed information is based on the objective and reliable dates of the various Russian equipment, in contrast to the accusations against us that are made without any evidence.
I do remember watching the press conference with all their theories and not being very impressed with it. Definitely it was a what moment.
We did talk about it online, just about theories that were being presented. Just didn't make a whole lot of sense.
By then, Vali Pekka and I were in constant contact, exchanging information and ideas, and his work on the wreckage was pointing us in a different direction than the Russian explanation. He was analysing the damage of the wreckage so he could figure out what kind of weapon would have been capable of shooting down Mh17. It felt like we had fragments that were forming into patterns, and when you start identifying these patterns and verifying them, that's where you start seeing the truth emerge.
There are lots of ways that the military can shoot a plane out of the sky. For some of the smaller aircraft, there are heavy machine guns, or then there are slightly bigger air defense cannons. Then we have various different kinds of missile launcher systems, like shoulder launch missiles, or then missile platforms that can then shoot higher in the sky. When a missile explodes, the fragments start spreading out. So it's this little cloud of fragments that then impacts at high speed. When I was going through the photographs and videos of the parts, there was this one area of the cockpit that showed significant damage, sort of fingerprint that a missile would leave. To shoot down a passenger aircraft, you need a fairly heavy missile system, and especially when it's flying at cruising altitude at over 10 kilometers. Only a handful of different systems could actually even reach that aircraft and bring it down. A Buk missile system would fit those parameters. So now the big question that needs to be answered: is there a weapon system on the ground that's capable of doing this near where the aircraft was shut down?
There was this video and it was being shared on Twitter by various people. It showed a missile launcher driving down a road that was allegedly not too far away from where Mh17 was shot down. It was not amazing quality, but it did look like it was the correct approximate shape for a Buk missile launcher. But it's about evidence and facts. Was this a Buk missile launcher? Could we place it in eastern Ukraine on the date of the crash? If we could verify this information, it could be a vital piece of evidence. This could be the murder weapon.